Hello, this is Shannon, and thank you for tuning in to Magic is Real, the podcast where we talk about near death experiences and all things metaphysical and spiritual. If you like this podcast and would like to support it for free, like, subscribe, share, and please leave comments underneath, even if you don't really have words to form. Even just a little heart emoji is super, super helpful. It triggers the algorithm to share this with more people. That's my little pitch. So today I'm very excited to introduce to you Peter. Now I say Peter Bedard. Do you say,
Perfect.
is that how you pronounce it?
You could people. I mean, if you're
I've heard,
French, it's very different.
oh,
But
Bedard.
but,
Yeah,
see,
Bedard.
I love
Yeah.
that. You got it. Yeah.
Okay, well, yeah, I'll just tell you about Peter. He is a keynote speaker, author, teacher, and hypnotherapist specializing in helping people with grief and recovery from anxiety and trauma. He has written some books called Convergence Healing, Healing Pain with Energetic Love, and Billy and the Anxiety Monster, a grown-up book for your inner child. So relatable to me. And he's at 18 years old, he experienced a near-death experience. So Peter, thank you so much for joining me today. It's such a pleasure to have you.
I'm thrilled to be here. I love doing these. Thank you for reminding me.
I love podcasting. It's the best thing in the world. I love to connect with different people and to hear all of your stories. So, I'm going to start by asking you about your background, your past, before your near death experience, what your spiritual beliefs may have been, anything you're willing to share that informs your overall spiritual journey and into the work that you do now.
Well, my near-death experience was when I was just almost 18. So my spiritual beliefs at that time weren't really clear. I was raised by a Catholic father and an Episcopalian mother. Um, I rebelled against the church. I didn't really find the church to be a place that was safe for me. I didn't understand. I I I didn't like the idea of this Jesus figure uh, being how he was made out to be. It didn't make sense to me. The fat white guy up in the sky didn't make any sense to me. And I was the kid that was always getting in trouble and questioning, the Sunday school teacher and all that type of stuff. So as a kid, I was just very open. I just remember when I was as a young kid, I remember like having lots of sort of everyday spiritual experiences that as a kid I didn't realize were spiritual experiences. Like I just was being a kid, just being myself. And there was so much energy. There was so much I could feel it. I could connect with it. I felt like I could move it around and all that type of stuff. Um, that all started to go away as I started to understand that who I was wasn't safe in the world as a kid. I My first experience, I'm not really understanding, but I can look back as an adult and I can say the first time I started to realize that I was gay was when I was in elementary school. I was in kindergarten, and I somehow was standing at a fence watching the older boys run around on the field with all the girls, and and we were all looking at all the girls, and I had at that very early age somehow I knew I wasn't supposed to be there. So that sort of started sort of a self-hatred, a censoring myself, not feeling safe, not being able to be who I was at a very early age. So that sense of freedom I had when I was young, super young, was kind of cut off by that age. So prior to my near death experience, my way of understanding of the world was that I knew what didn't work for me, but I really didn't understand what worked for me. I really hadn't had the opportunity to discover that yet.
Mhm. Well, that sounds about right. I that's pretty much where I was too, I think. And I just wanted to make a little side note because I talk about it on the podcast that I have 15 years of 12 step under my belt for
Yes. Oh, yeah.
yes,
I'm
yep,
giving you the hands up
we'll
for
do it.
that.
Thank
Awesome.
you. And that is for the program is called Sex and Love Addicts Anonymous, but really that's misleading because what it is a anyone who has any kind of attachment difficulty or a sort of faulty relationship with intimacy. So it could be that you're avoidant. It could be that you are running after unavailable people. It could be so that it encompasses a lot. But I just wanted to say, I most of the people in that group, or like half of them at least, are gay, and I know that that is because of what I just wanted to address what you said. I think
Mhm.
in our generation, growing up in the 80s, late 70s, 80s, people did not talk about being gay. It
Oh,
just
no.
wasn't like I thought that this guy Michael was like the most popular boy in school because he was surrounded by women all the time. And now it's like not once did anybody say, "Oh, that guy's gay." It was just not talked about. So, and I grew up in Connecticut where it was like very waspy. So I think no one had an issue. It was just sort of like, we don't talk about this. So anything you go through as a child where you feel different. I did too, for different reasons. Isolated, less
Shame.
than, not fitting in,
Mhm.
shame, all of that stuff is, and that's I'm talking about it now because we're going to talk about it also later, in terms of what it is that you do for a living. So I just wanted to just honor your experience, but also tell you that, like, that's why so many people end up in these, programs because they weren't given the support that they needed at that time.
Absolutely. A validation for sex for
Yeah.
many people, even if they're not in one of those or identify as one of those programs, sex for many people is a form of validation. Oh, you
Yeah.
really like me. I can't,
Yeah. Yep.
I see this a lot actually with my male clients, right? That if they can catch the girl, if they can get her attention, then they're okay.
Mhm.
Then, they're validated. They're okay in the world. If they get that attention or that affection or whatever. The problem is that once they get it, then they have to keep getting it from other people.
Yep.
And so it
That was
becomes a whole thing.
That was my whole thing. So, I just wanted to relate with that and mention it as we go into talking about healing from that kind of emotional trauma and grief and anxiety. But yeah, so I'd love to hear, let's just start with, let's kind of move into when you were almost 18. What happened to you that changed the course of your life?
Sure. Well, as a young kid, life was amazing. Again, once I realized that I didn't fit in my family. My dad was a Marine. My mom
Wow.
was an Avon lady, housewife, and their consciousness of people like me, I just didn't fit in. I had two older siblings. They were 6 and 7 years older, so I'm 6 and they're 13. It was a little awkward. 12 and 13. It was a little like I felt like an only child a lot of the time. And so by the time I got into high school, I felt very isolated. I felt very alone. I had a lot of suicidal tendencies, that type of stuff. I never acted on any of it, but I thought about it regularly. So that's kind of where my mindset was. And then I was a kid that was discovered as a dancer. So I had that body, there's a football player body, there's a basketball player body. I had the dancer body. So I had turned out feet and I had turned out hips and I could jump really high. And I was discovered in a way and put into school and I had scholarships. I came from a poor family. We didn't have a lot of money. So I got the scholarships. And when I was in the studio, that's when I felt safe. That's when I felt like home. And I started in theater as a kid, and it was just where I excelled. It's where I knew I could be myself. So when I was 17, I had auditioned for a vaudeville show of all things. Some of my earliest shows were like 5,000 seat theaters because I was the kid in the adult cast, right? I had one line or two lines or whatever it was, right? And they had a vaudeville theater in my little town, and it was really like a traditional vaudeville theater. You threw popcorn and you had booed and hissed, and that the red hot mama and the villain and all that type of stuff, right? And so my grandfather had done vaudeville a little bit when he was younger, and he played the banjo. And so he was a factory worker, but when they needed somebody to fill in at some point, he would play. And I had this very connected feeling to that. And so when this opportunity came up, I auditioned, I got in the show. I was only 18. I was under 18, so I couldn't even be in the theater. I could only be up on the stage because I was under drinking age. It wasn't legal for me because it was considered a bar. And I just was on top of the world. It was opening night. The show went great. They had a party after the show, and I wanted to, of course, go to that party, the cast party. And the adults around me were very protective. There was no way they were going to let anything happen to me. But my parents were very overprotective and they wouldn't let me go. And so I was really, really angry, but I was a dutiful son. And I got on my moped and I started to drive back home. And on my way home, I was going into a curve and there was a parked semi truck in that curve. And a car came from nowhere. I hadn't even seen it, came up behind me. And as I was trying to go around the semi truck, I the car pushed my bike, and my bike and my body hit the truck. The car drove away. I bounced out into the middle of the street. Now, the really interesting thing about that particular moment was that I got to watch the experience. So I jumped out of my body. I watched my bike hit the semi truck. I watched my body hit the semi truck. I watched the car drive away. So I was just in this very detached experience. And it was in October. And I remember thinking what a beautiful night it was while all this was going on. And I like to say that because I wasn't in any pain. And I think that's something that over the years I started to realize that just because the body may look like it's in pain, when people are like older people are going through the dying process and we medicate them, right? We give them morphine, we do that type of stuff, and they may look like they're in pain, but they may not consciously even be in their body. And I
Yeah.
think it's a soul choice that we get to make. Like we can have that experience. I think the purpose of life is experience. We can have that experience of going through the changing process, the transformation, the dying process. We can go through it and be in a lot of pain, or we can kind of just step back and let our body do what it needs to do. And so I like to say that because a lot of people are very affected by loved ones who pass. They're very affected by their perception of that person being in a lot of pain. And from my own personal experience, that's not necessarily happening. And this again, my belief, I believe on the soul level, we can jump in and out of our bodies, especially at that time when we're so close to crossing over, that we may not necessarily even be feeling.
I just want to back that up before you continue because I'm a medium, and so often my clients are concerned about. Well, actually, it's they don't express that directly. It's the soul comes through and says, please tell them I didn't suffer. My body, my soul left the body. So even though my heart was still beating, my soul spared me by putting me on the other side so that I didn't have to experience that. And I've heard that from so many near-death experiencers. It's calming for me too, to know that there are a lot of horrible things that can happen. And in most cases, you'll be protected from that kind of pain. So that takes a
I
lot of the fear
love
out of
that.
it. Me
I love
too,
that you hear that in your, yeah, in you
all
hear
the
it in
time.
your mediumship. That's
All the
awesome.
time, because that's our biggest concern. My mother had an out of body experience when she was little because she was
Mhm.
just sick, throwing up, and she felt horrible, and her soul left. Her soul was like, "I'm out of here." And so it can happen. So that's really comforting. So thank you for sharing that. Please continue.
Sure. So I hovered over the scene for quite a while. There's no ambulance report or police report. So an ambulance eventually did come get me, but there's no report, there's no filing. I don't even know how I was discovered. And it was a little downtown that I was in with the show, but I was driving into the suburbs on a Saturday night, and there just wasn't a lot of traffic. So I have no idea who found me, how I was found, who called it in. I have no idea. But my body, I was observing my body. I was sort of hovering above. I could see the top of the semi truck and I could look down, and I was aware that my body was pretty mangled. My legs were twisted underneath me. My bike was really trashed. The whole front end of the bike had been pushed into the back end and the frame was bent. And I just was in this place of just peace. There was just this calm. And again, I recognized that it was a beautiful end of summer night. Like there was this coolness in the air, but the warmth coming off the ground from the heat of the day. It was really beautiful. And then I was traveling through a tunnel, and I did the tunnel thing. Not
Mm.
everybody does the tunnel thing, but I did the tunnel thing. And the tunnel was very curious to me. The whole experience was just very curious. But the tunnel specifically, I was going down this tunnel and it would spin, but it would corkscrew. So it would be moving as it was, right? It wasn't just a
Mhm.
stagnant cycle. Like it wasn't just this happening. It was this and it was moving in a direction. And I was then shooting through that movement. It was very interesting. And it was all kind of white, sort of. It's hard to describe it. And then I ended up on another side, on the other side. I don't really know what to call it. And in that place, there was a consciousness. I was aware that I am who I am. There was an awareness of that. I could look down and see my body, and I was aware that I had my body. My body was different, and I'll get to that. I was in no pain. My body was fully intact, unlike the physical one that I had left. I was walking around this space. I couldn't see a floor, but I was walking on what felt like solid energy. It felt like I was on solid ground. I couldn't see a ceiling or I couldn't see any walls, but I felt like I was in a contained space. It was a massive contained space, but I felt like I was being held in this energy. And again, there was a sense of a floor and a ceiling, but I don't know. I don't know how else to describe that. And everything in the space was just this beautiful, translucent, vibrant, vibrating sort of white color. It was kind of like stepping into a prism. If you've ever seen a prism, you know, like a prism little triangle, and the sun hits it and it lights up and you get the rainbows that refract off of it, right? That's what it was like being in this space. There was colors I don't even know how to describe, colors that don't exist, or at least our eyes in this current world don't see them. Doesn't mean they don't exist, but on the other side, there were colors that I didn't had never seen before. And I was very curious, and it was this joyful curiosity. Being on the other side, I like to say I do keynote speaking and talks and workshops and stuff like that. And I like to say to people that the best thing that ever happened to me was my death experience. And I'm very serious. I mean, kind of joking and being kind of glib with it. But the best thing that ever happened to me was dying. Being on the other side is just pure bliss. It's absolute joy. It's every positive, uplifting word, adjective that you could describe that it doesn't, our language cannot comprehend or convey the actual experience. You know, if you take the word bliss and multiply it by a trillion, you're still not close enough to understanding the joy that's on the other side, the beauty that's on the other side, the feeling of home, of being held, of belonging, of being safe. Of it's just it's an amazing experience. And I had been walking around and I was very curious on the other side of like where everybody was. I thought that when you died, I don't know how I got this idea. Probably watched a bunch of movies as a kid, but I thought that when you died, you were supposed to meet your ancestors. Like they were going to be lined up or there was going to be a party. Everybody's like, "Hey, welcome here," or something like that. Well, there was nobody there. I was literally thinking, well, where's my dead dog? I thought I was going to see my dog. Where's my grandmother? I wanted to see my grandmother that died right before or right after I think I was born, that I never got to physically meet. I wanted to see her, my great grandmother. And again, no disappointment, just a super curiosity. And walking around this space, just sort of enjoying it, walking around, being in this one environment, wondering if anybody was going to come and say hi or what I'm doing here, because I don't know what I'm doing here. And then I turn around and I see this person, and it's someone to this day, I still can't tell you who it was. Maybe, Sharon, you could fill in a few blanks for me. But
Right. We'll have to
I
see.
turn around and I see this person, and again, my mind is curious. My heart feels like it's exploding. Literally, my chest, my ribs feel like they were split in half and they were flayed open. And my heart was just shooting out, just like powerful, this beam, this energy of love to this person that I can't identify. And my head is literally thinking, why am I having this experience? Like it's like my heart was being ripped out of my chest in this absolute love for this man that looked like, the only way I can describe him is if you have an idea of who Lao Tzu was or Fu Manchu, right?
Mhm.
A very traditional, older Chinese man with the Fu Manchu mustache, the wispy long beard. He's wearing a brown tweed suit. Why I notice these things, I have no idea, but I'm very conscious. He's wearing a hat. I'm very conscious of him wearing a brown tweed suit for some reason. And a thought pops into my head of Hong Kong 1890s.
Mm.
I have no idea where that came from. I've never been to Hong Kong. There are no Asian people lineage I'm aware of in my family. I have no idea what that was. I see him, and he, although I know his suit is brown, although I know it's tweed, he's like showing like again, I'm going to give another movie reference. If you ever saw Star Wars and the hologram of Princess Leia calling for help, right? That little, R2D2 projects that little 3D image of Princess Leia, or when Obi-Wan Kenobi does that, or whatever. That's what it's like. I could see through him. I could see through him, but yet there's still this depth, and there's this form, and there's mass, but I'm seeing through. And the only way I can kind of understand that is if you've ever gone to the ocean and gone to a place like the Mediterranean, and the sea is so clear and you can look through the water. You're aware that the water is there and there's form and there's mass to the water. You can see details of the water, a wave, a current, but you can also see through it. And so that's the only way I know how to describe that. I don't know how accurate or how, if it parlays properly and you understand it, but I'm seeing this man. I'm feeling this incredible love. My heart is ripping out of my chest. There's a curiosity of what the heck is this? What is going on here? And he says to me, "You're not supposed to be here."
How
And I'm taken
rude.
aback. Pardon me?
How rude.
How rude. Absolutely. I felt it was like, I'm like, well, I'm here. Like, I was a little sarcastic. And I'm like, I'm here to deal with it, basically. Uh, and there's some time that goes by that I don't really know what happens in that experience. I know that there's something going on. I'm not sure what that I can remember. But I do remember him saying that I needed to leave. It wasn't my time. I needed to go. This is a podcast, so I can say it. I said, F
Mhm.
you, and gave him the fingers because I was like, I'm not leaving here. This is great. I don't want to go back there. I don't
Yeah.
want to go back where I didn't fit in, where my body is mangled, where I don't I know I'm not going back. That's done. And I got very angry. And it was interesting because it was like the anger that I had right before the accident, the anger I had of my being upset with my parents for not trusting me, for being resenting them for obeying my parents and going back home, which I didn't want to do. I was almost 18. Why can't they trust me? That type of anger came back. And the next thing I knew, I was gone. And I used to joke and say I got kicked out of heaven. Heaven didn't even want me. And I was back on in this realm that we live in, this physical realm. I was not in my body. I was back in that place of observing my body. By that time, the ambulance, the paramedics had shown up. I saw them parked their car, put the back of the car towards my where the accident was. So they were kind of in front of me. So they were here, my body was here, and the semi truck was here, and I'm watching. And the truck backs in. They come out. They open the doors. They get a gurney out. They're rushing over to me. There was one. There was I think one of the guys was African American and one was Latino, and the African American guy is down on top of me. He's testing for vitals. His face is like right here. I'm sure he's listening to see if he can see or feel a breath. And in that moment, suddenly for a split second, I'm back in my body. I open my eyes, and I remember thinking it was funny. He's like, I'm here and he's here. He's like on top of me. And I open my eyes and he jumps like a cat, like
Yeah.
Tigger. Like his entire body just goes. It must have scared the crap out of him because he obviously, I'm sure he wasn't finding a pulse. And I said, my wallet is in my back pocket. Take me to the hospital, please. And then I jumped out of my body again. That's as long as I stay. And then I saw them put me on the gurney, put me in the back of the truck, close the doors in the ambulance, and drive away. And I remember hanging out and saying, I'm not going back in there. And even thinking, I guess this is how, like, again, that curiosity. I was thinking, like, I guess this is how ghosts are made because I'm not jumping back in that body, but I'm not going to go to the other side. I just got kicked out of there. So I'm going to be just floating around in this world. I'm just going to be hanging out because I'm not going back there. And then the next memory I have is actually opening my eyes, waking up in the hospital, looking up at the ceiling and seeing those ugly dropped white ceilings, those corporate business, those
Mhm.
ugly ceilings.
Yeah.
Open, laying down, looking up, seeing that ceiling and going, fuck. Right? I did not want to be back. I did not want to be back. So that's the overall experience of my death.
Thank you for sharing that. I had such a resonance when you were talking about the tunnel and describing how it was twisting because
Mhm,
I've been through the tunnel not in a near death experience, but in a meditation, and it
mhm,
sent me out where I had a fascinating and out of body experience with someone that I know.
mhm.
And right after it happened, he texted me and said, "What just happened?" And I was like, "That really happened?" But it was so I knew it was real because
Yeah,
how would we both have this thing happen at the same time? We were both meditating, I guess, and sort of met each other in the quantum field.
you
But
were
when I
correlated.
it was so crazy. It, wa- we s- I saw I felt I know exactly the tunnel you're talking about because I went through it, and it was so cool. So and
It's
a lot
beautiful, and it
yeah.
it hums. There's frequency. So I part of what I
Mm,
left out is that there is a hum. There's a frequency that is happening in the tunnel and on the other side.
I've
There
heard that a
there's
lot.
sound. Yeah.
I've so many near-death experiencers describe the same exact thing, which is really fascinating.
Mhm.
And I know that a lot of people will say, "Oh, I wish I had a near-death experience because you said it was the best thing that ever happened was dying." And I know a lot of near-death experiencers are like, "Oh no, I do not wish this on my worst enemy," or I just don't really suggest going through it. Were there parts of it that coming back were very difficult? Was it beautiful when you were there, but then
Oh,
and you're like, "Oh, but then when you come back, what's that adjustment like?"
yeah. So the opposite. The best thing that ever happened to me was going to the other side. The worst thing that ever happened to me was coming back.
Coming back, yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. And I had to really there's a thing that you've probably seen in your interviews when people have near death experiences underneath younger than 21, 18, 21, some younger than that age. There's a desire for us that have had those experiences to go back.
Mhm.
It's like we've tasted the candy and we want more of it.
Yeah.
So I mean, a couple decades after that, there was just this constant yearning, and it wasn't a suicide thing, but there was a constant yearning to go back home, what felt like home, and even in a way a punishment. And that was my perception. I don't believe that the universe does that, but my perception was I was actually like somehow being punished or not good enough. And it was feeding into sort of my old childhood stuff of not fitting in, not belonging, not the church and all that type of stuff. That it was a sort of an extension of those types of things. But the yearning to have that level of joy, of bliss, of freedom back in my life, that was just, yeah, it was remarkable. And I had several close to death experiences where I could have chosen to walk out and I stayed. And so that became even more frustrating because I'm like, why do I keep staying?
Yeah. In those experiences, did you actually have another out-of-body experience, or was it just stuff where it was
Yeah.
like, "Okay, wow, yeah." How many of those
Yeah.
would you had have you experienced?
I've
4?
had four of those. Yeah. I've had all kinds of strange things that happened to me. I've had my hemoglobin splitting and shutting down my organs. I've had white blood cells attacking red blood cells. I've had severe dehydration where I was pumped with fluids and told if I had gotten there a half hour later, I wouldn't have made it. I've had several things like that where we just figured it out.
Yeah, it seems like a lot of near-death experiencers, once their soul leaves their body the first time, it happens much more easily because they sort of remember how to.
Oh yeah.
And so a
Oh
lot
yeah.
of them have more than one, and it may be that those particular things wouldn't have caused an out-of-body experience in most people, but because your body was like, "Oh, we'll do this again.
Yeah.
Let's get out of here."
There's a knowing, yeah. And I think our language needs to change. I mean, there's no way I'm gonna be able to do it necessarily, but like I know people who do journeys, right? They
Mhm.
go on like meditation things, or they do ayahuasca, or they do something like that, and they talk about how they die. And I'm like, we need to kind of clarify that. So I think that like my experience was a death experience, right? I died and I came back. The experience of an ayahuasca journey, I think that where someone feels like they're going through a purging, a dying, right? That type of thing. To me, that's what a near death experience is. And then there's close to death experiences, which is what I did 4 times, where I came super close to dying and I could have, but I decided to stay.
Yeah, clearly you're meant to be here,
Right.
and, this really made me think about something too that I'm thinking of this from an addict standpoint, that when you talk about it's not that you wanna take your life, but you're just like, "I wanna go back to where I come from,"
Mhm.
because there's no greater love and bliss experience than being on the other side. And so
Exactly.
if you're there, you can't imagine that like any of the earthly pleasures are greater than that. So which is hard for us to relate to because it's like, what do you mean? You mean you'll never get to taste food again, or you'll never have sex again, or you'll never feel that. But interestingly,
Mm.
it sort of begs the question, like, I wonder if I mean, I know that we're addicts because we're trying to avoid pain, but are we also addicts because we're trying to find that again in ourselves? It's like some
Absolutely.
part of ourselves knows I just wanna get back to that bliss again. So we're constantly
Mhm.
chasing that high without even really knowing what we're comparing it to, but I think
Mhm.
that in whether it's shopping, drinking, drugs, sex, gambling, we're always chasing this high and this escape, and I wonder how much of it is part of that. What do you think?
Yeah. And talking about addiction, I don't think it's a accident that a lot of the people that I've worked with over the years, I've been in practice as a therapist for almost 20 years, like 19 plus years.
Mhm.
And um, there's a commonality, I think, from a lot of the people that have come to me with addiction issues that they actually are trying to medicate their gifts,
Yeah.
right? They have these gifts, they've had these experiences, they have these feelings, they have these connections. They don't understand them, they don't quite even know what they are, and it's scary. There's no way of kind of grasping onto anything with them in the beginning. And I've had several of my clients that we discovered that they really don't have addiction issues. They are so highly sensitive people, so super sensitive. They're so empathic. They have such gifts as far as clairvoyance or something of that sort that's going on that go to substances or things outside of themselves to sort of numb these
Mhm.
experiences because they're just so, they don't know how to be present with it. They just
Yeah,
don't.
that I relate with that. You know, a lot of addicts have really severe trauma and they have abuse
Hmm.
in their past. I don't. I have a
Hmm.
beautiful family. You know, the biggest thing for me was just being told I was ugly because I had a birthmark on my face when I was a kid. So I was like very internalized that a lot. Like people were pointing and staring, but that wasn't, I mean, that was my trauma, but it wasn't severe trauma. I was very loved and cared for, and my parents are still loving and together. I realized only later in my recovery that it was the actual anxiety that I was escaping from. Just my own anxiety was my trauma because
Hmm.
as a highly sensitive person, I absorb everything. And so that can be very difficult to navigate in a world this dense where everything feels overwhelming. And so that makes perfect sense. And I assume that you're the same way.
Yeah.
And I would love to hear, is that what brought you into the field of helping other people
So
with anxiety?
I'm so back in the day, I would have said I'm a highly sensitive person. And now I would not describe myself as a highly sensitive person. I was also the person that if I was waiting in line and somebody was wanted you to hold their place, I was the person that would be asked.
Hmm.
I was the person that if I sat on a plane, the person sitting next to me would feel safe enough to tell their entire life story to. I was that person. And I really said, I don't want that. I'm a therapist and I do that for a living and I sit with people and I've learned how to sit with people and be a deep connection for them so that they feel absolutely heard, that they feel so witnessed, so heard, which I think is the gift of an empath or an HSP. It's the gift that we can give the world because we feel so deeply. And at this point in my life, I have learned how not to be a sponge. So I have learned how to sit with someone, listen to them, cry with them, feel with them, and then be able to say, have a blessed day. Right? And without carrying that with me. Now, I still don't do great in a lot of crowds. I still don't do great in big public events or things of that sort. And I've learned to navigate them. And most of the time now, I don't get overwhelmed by them. But literally, just earlier this week, there was an event I was supposed to go to, and I walked up to it, and I'm like, not happening. Can't do it. There's just too much in the room right now. There is just way too much. I'm going to go sit over here. And I didn't leave. So in the past, I would have just ran away. I didn't leave, but I put myself in a place where I could observe without being involved. So
Hmm.
that's how I learned how to do
Yeah, I'm always that person at a party who's like in the bathroom every hour
it.
just to sit there for just to kind of decompress, like, I
Oh
have to
yeah.
go to the bathroom," or even at a
Oh yeah.
concert, I've been known to go out in the lobby and just sit in a chair, just to
Hmm.
sort of I'm okay, I just kinda need space, and,
Oh,
as a
right there with you.
medium yeah, yep,
Mhm.
like, as a therapist and as a medium, we both hold space, and I hold space easily, too. I don't absorb it. I can cry with people and hold space, and as an empath, I can really make them feel heard, and for some reason, that doesn't drain me, but in my regular life, it can be a little more difficult, so I would love to hear from you when you say you've kind of learned, what are some ways that we can hold energetic boundaries for ourselves?
Well, one of the learnings, so I was in Al-Anon. I still consider myself an Al-Anon.
Yeah.
I went religiously to Al-Anon for a good 15-year period. Um, and since I love the program, I still go to the program every now and then. I've moved into more of a spiritual path, but the teachings are always with me. One of the things I learned from Al Anon was where I stop and someone else starts. Knowing that boundary. In program, they often say things like your side of the street, their side of the street. And for a very long time, one of my big mantras was none of my business, None of my business. I start feeling somebody's emotions. None of my business. None of my business. Keep it over there. And it would become kind of a chant in my consciousness. None of my business. None of my business. It doesn't belong to me. Right. And doing that long enough has had a really good shift for me because I still, if I want to, I could still sort of tap in, but most of the time I don't want to.
Yeah.
It's like, none of my business.
Yeah. And when we're talking about, earlier we were saying, a lot of a lot of anxiety and a lot of fear and a lot of addiction or just sort of emotional problems can come from, well, your formative years. It's your biology and it's your formative years and what we experience. So even if it was being alienated, being isolated, I was selective mute. So my anxiety was so big that I stopped talking so that I was the kid that the teachers would say, well, Shannon doesn't speak. Just know that. And so I was kind of not, no one forced it. It's just that I was always sitting alone or I was isolated. And because I refused to speak, kids didn't know what to do. So they just ignored me. So I was sort of, it was a self imposed isolation. But because of that, I always grew up feeling weird, less than, not accepted, not part of the group. Hence validation addiction, hence needing to feel validated and to feel like I'm special and okay and seen. So when we talk about that, I'd love to know too how much of your experience or your insight from your near death experience informed your approach to helping people to heal from anxiety and grief and the trauma that happens in childhood, whether it's something as simple as being isolated or if it's like real assault or, physical abuse or other kinds of abuse.
Well, if I may go back a little bit to the
Yep.
example you gave of choosing to not speak, right? Of being mute. That is it's a protection.
Mhm.
And so recognizing, oh, there's something inside of me that is threatened. There's something inside of me that's suffering. The work I do isn't necessarily groundbreaking. It's very different. And 10 years ago, it was super, super different. It's becoming even more common now. And like my first book is Convergence Healing, Healing Pain with Energetic Love, right? My new book is Billy and the Anxiety Monster, How to Love Your Anxiety, right? I have a third book I'm working on that's When Happiness is Work, How to Love Your Depression and Make It Work for You, right? So part of what I do, and then one of the big messages is that there's parts of us that are suffering. These parts, what we tend to do with them is we're embarrassed, we want to cut them off, we want to shut them down or throw them away, or we feel ashamed of them, we make them wrong or bad or whatever it is. We want to hide them, those parts. And a lot of the core work I do is around loving the parts that are suffering. So, like when I've worked with my cancer clients, it's about loving the tumor. It's not about blowing the shit out, which is a lot of how a lot of people use holistic things, right? I'm going to think about it being destroyed in my body and just blowing it up, right? Or cutting it out. No, we're going to love it. We're going to love it so much that it no longer needs to feel bad,
Mhm.
right? And so to go to that part that was scared, that felt it needed to protect itself, how can I love that part so that it can? I'm imagining for you, you had to make that choice at some point. You have a podcast,
Yeah.
right? That
Yeah.
you had to start loving that part so that it could speak again, right?
Mhm.
Now, my near death experience, I have always been super sensitive. I've never really had, I didn't come back with any big gifts as far as clairvoyance or some sort of psychic ability. I did, for years, my healing was very slow. Because I shattered my knee, I split my wrist open. I lost all the nerves in my hand. I cracked 5 vertebrae. I had undiagnosed brain damage. And then I had a series of issues like my hemoglobin splitting or my white blood cells attacking my red blood cells. I had fibromyalgia and arthritis and asthma. I had chronic pain for long periods of time. Not only the bone joint pain from the injuries, but the fibromyalgia like pain of feeling like you have the flu every day,
Yeah.
that swollen, achy, I can't move kind of feeling. Um, I had to learn how to walk again. I was told that if I was able to walk, that I would have to have assistance, and I'd probably have to have my leg replaced, my knee replaced by the time I was 30, by the time I was 40. So there was a lot of wheelchairs, a lot of therapy, a lot of canes and crutches and all that type of stuff. So I didn't come back with any obvious gifts, but I look back at the experience and what happened to me as a blessing. I, I, we don't know who killed me. The person's never been caught. There was no, like I said, no police report, no nothing. We have no idea, of any of that or why it was done. For some reason, I think it was a man. I must have seen some sort of reflection, a mirror in my rearview mirrors or something. A younger guy, probably around my age, but there's no other information to that. So I had to heal myself, and in doing that, I created this process, right? So I started to heal myself and understanding that all pain has a physical side to it, a mental side to it, a spiritual side to it. And often the physical side was least painful, right? My shattered knee was far less painful than my broken heart, right? That my heart was absolutely broken. I had no idea what I was going to do with my life. Prior to that, I was on a course to be a dancer. I was on the course to be, a musical theater performer, to do all that type of stuff. I was gifted and that was going to be my career, right? When I lost not only that experience and that potential or possibility, I felt like I lost my voice. I didn't know who I was in the world anymore. My identity was so wrapped up in these skills that I had, this talent that I had, that once that was gone, I was absolutely lost. And so part of my healing was finding my way in the world, right? Not only physically, but mentally and spiritually. And so looking at those things, they've given me that experience has given me so many gifts. It's given me the idea that I don't actually, I actually think that there are accidents. A lot of, especially spiritual people, say there's no such thing as an accident. Everything's meant to be, or, that type of thing. I disagree with that. I think there are accidents. I think we have free will. I think free will is a real thing, and that stuff can happen, and that ultimately I have a spiritual belief that we're all going to the same place. We're all going to this beautiful other side. How you get there, accidents can happen along the way.
That does make so much sense because there are people that are in horrible accidents and either they saw maybe an angel or somebody and they're like, I was saved. It's like, then what's the point of the accident? I mean, sometimes the point of the accident, if it is part of your soul contract, is I needed to learn whatever you needed to learn. And sometimes things just happen. And that's
Right.
uh I know Matt Frazier, the medium, talked about that. He actually once said, and I don't know what I don't know, I don't know for sure, but he said something about if you people that take other people's lives, that's their free will. That wasn't supposed to happen. That was
Mhm.
somebody else taking their free will, and that resonated with me a lot too.
Exactly. And the
Yeah.
person that loses their life, well, I had a whole other life to keep going with. Now,
Yeah.
I came back for mine, but yeah, I think I would be very interested in your take with your talents on the idea of suicide. So,
Yeah.
sensitive topic. I don't want to trigger anybody right now. And I do think that a quite high proportion of people who end up dying from suicide didn't intend to.
I agree. I agree with that, and just to be clear, if someone takes their lives, they're not going to a dark place. They're
No, they're
going
not.
where everyone else is going, and I'm not saying do it. It's gonna be great. Because but it's still another free will thing. So it's not that is a free
Right.
will thing where you choose to end your life before your soul contract is up. And nothing
Mhm.
bad happens to you. It's just
Nope.
you might have to just come back in another form and do it again
Exactly.
to learn this. It's
Exactly.
not really an escape, although I have the most compassion for anyone suffering from bipolar disorder, schizophrenia, major depressive disorder. So it's not, I'm not shaming anyone for just saying I can't do this anymore. But you're right. I think that that is one of those things that that wasn't necessarily your soul's path.
Right. And then I do think there are soul suicides. Like there are
Yeah.
people that who come here to live life to a certain point and then to not. And that then gives us, all the people that are around them and love them, an experience that we have to process. We have to process the grief. We have to understand. We have to do whatever it is. We have to learn to be alone. We have to learn to be without, whatever that is, that contract that they had to have that experience, is teaching us or calling us into a higher way of living, a higher
Yeah.
way of loving,
I
right?
agree with that because I've heard it said too, and I don't think this is necessarily the truth every time, but I heard someone say, well, if we have soul contracts, then why do babies die? And someone
Yep.
said, because that soul was not meant to, it wasn't about that soul's life
Nope.
lessons. It was about that child was here to be a teacher.
Yeah.
So again, I don't want to say that happens in every circumstance, but
There's one thing that I have learned over the years, and this is again, I only speak from my own truth. So I'm speaking, I'm
yeah.
not, I don't want to speak in anybody else's, but the whole idea of life purpose has become funny to me because I was very big on life purpose. What am I doing with my life? What am I creating? What's my life purpose? Oh, that was very a big part of my younger days. And I had to be useful and I wanted to leave my mark and I wanted to do all that type of stuff. And now I just think it's kind of funny because
Right.
to me, in my own spiritual growth and my own understanding of life, and as these unfold to me, I look at this. My background is in quantum theory and theology. I have a master's degree in those fields, right? And I look at all this learning and I look at all this type of stuff I've done, and I, especially in the realm of theology, it's been said in pretty much every religion or spirituality that I've come across that we are made in the emanation of the divine, right?
Mhm.
We are an expression of the goddess, whatever you want to call it, of the universe. We are a physical manifestation of that, right? And that the purpose is for us to be an expression of the divine, for a way that the divine gets to understand itself, right?
Mhm.
So that's how I look at things. Like the divine is, in a way, in my understanding, in a way, very much like the unconscious. Like it is a consciousness, but it's like the subconscious of ourselves. All right, right. And to understand itself and be able to see itself, it comes into physical form to be able to view who it is, to understand itself, to grow, to expand, to become even greater, right? The intelligence of the individual that's giving back to the whole, the oneness, right? To understand itself as the purpose of the being of us. So just by our being here, I am already achieving my purpose, right?
Yes.
I am an expression of the divine, an individualized expression of the divine, having this life experience, doing all the things I'm doing. I'm the individualization of that. And in doing that, I am already succeeding. I've already lived and I am living my life purpose right now. So when people come to me and they're like, I don't know what my life purpose is, I'm like, your life purpose is just to be the beautiful expression that you are. What if
Yeah.
that was your life purpose? Now, if you want to make money or you want to build a foundation or a charity or you want to do something like that, awesome. And you're already living your life purpose. You're already whole. You're already perfect. You're already complete, exactly as you are. And to get people to understand that is, in our society that is so focused on results, so focused on a hierarchy or becoming something instead of just being something. It's just kind of like, oh well, I don't know. What if you just already are?
Yeah, we're very goals driven and very in our culture, in
Mhm,
American culture,
mm,
it's all about achievement and goals
mhm.
and rising to the top and making the most money. And I've said the same thing. You
And
are
yet
doing,
Aboriginal
yeah.
people, I mean,
Oh,
well,
yeah.
what if you, and this is stereotyping. There's a great book out in the 80s with the mutant something or another. It's a great book if you could find it. It was written by a woman that was sort of quote unquote kidnapped by the Australian Aboriginals. And the Aboriginals referred to the non-Aboriginals as the mutants, right?
Yeah.
And their whole purpose was just to live and love. Like that's it. Just to be an
Yeah.
expression of the divine.
Just to
You know,
exist.
yeah, exactly. Like how
Yeah.
beautiful is that? Oh my God, where did all the pressure go? Where'd
Right.
all the stress go?
Yeah.
Oh,
And
I
it,
could just be me.
yeah. I love that. And I know it's hard for people to remember because we live in a capitalist society where you got to pay your bills. And so we got to make money and we got to do the thing. And we all want to do it with purpose. And we don't want to do jobs that we hate. We want to do jobs that bring us to life and that where we can be of service using our special gifts. But at the end of the day, just by experiencing what we are experiencing, we are doing we're fulfilling our mission here on this earth. So
Yeah.
that's beautiful. I love that you said all of that. What is just riff on this? It's a big question. What, if there's one thing you want people to know, what is it?
Oh, it would have to go. The big thing I always ask people to do is just to know that the truth of who they are, and what I've already said, is that you, as you are, who you are right now. Imagine if you felt this, not only heard it, but had felt it when you were going through your addiction, the high point of your addiction. If somebody just came up to you and said, "Who you are exactly as you are is whole, perfect, and
Yeah,
right."
I
Your
wouldn't have
mind
bought it.
may have rejected it.
Yeah.
You might have heard it, right? And that the parts of us that are suffering, physically, mentally, or spiritually, those parts, more than anything, need your love. They don't need your abuse. They don't need you to be a bully. They don't need to be beaten up. They don't need to be cut out or poisoned or thrown away. They don't need to be shamed anymore. What if you actually just stood with that part of you that you were so embarrassed, or like you could say the birthmark that you used to have, right? Or something of that sort. I used to have these bony shoulders. I was very thin and I had this a raised clavicle, and I was so embarrassed by my shoulders. I was so embarrassed. I felt humiliated by it. And then somebody came up to me and said, "You have the sexiest shoulders I'd
Mm-hmm.
ever seen."
Oh my God, I
And I was
love
like,
that. Yeah.
I ran away. I literally ran away. I'm like, who the hell? No way. I can't be loved. Nobody could find that attractive. Are you kidding me? Right? To get out of our way and to love the parts of us, right? To love the parts of us that are suffering brings about healing right there.
Thank you so much. You have so much great wisdom. I'm going to just ask you one last thing, which is what do you have coming up? I know you're writing a book, which I can't wait till you publish it because I have people I want to share it with. And is there anything else you want to share about your services or things that you have coming up, your
Yeah.
workshops? And we'll have a link below. What's your website? I will put it down there, but tell us anyway.
Okay, well, we'll start with the website. The website is Convergence Healing. My whole brand is underneath that title. So at Convergence Healing, if you want to look me up on social media, and it's CONVERGENCE and convergencehealing.com. I have articles on my site. I have lots of free stuff. I have a whole bunch of videos on YouTube and that are absolutely free because I think it's important to give it back. If somebody does want to work with me, we can schedule a time. I work all over the world because I have been a keynote speaker and I've done workshops in many different countries. I've been online on Skype for like 16 of my 19 years. And so when COVID hit, it was really easy for me to just put all my clients online, and I love it. I do have two books. My first book was such a blessing. I wrote this book just for my clients, and a friend of mine gave it to a friend of hers who gave it to the head of Simon and Schuster. And Simon and Schuster bought my first book, and it's called Convergence Healing: Healing Pain with Energetic Love. It's on Amazon. I recorded it as an audiobook, so it's out there. My second book came out in October, and it's called Billy and the Anxiety Monster: How to Love Your Anxiety and Heal, a grown-up book for your inner child. And that book is just doing, it's so good. I had originally written it for adults in a children's book style. So it's got graphics. It's like 8.5 by 8.5 square. It's really cute. It's a super easy read. And it's a process that I illustrate in the book for working through anxiety, learning how to make anxiety your best friend and to love it. And at the back of the book, there's a little cheat sheet so you can go through the process on your own. That book is doing great. I've been doing a bunch of speaking engagements. I'm at the Boys and Girls Club, a lot of public libraries around town. I've been flying back and forth up and down California and Arizona, giving talks and workshops on it. But those things can all be found on my social media. So in case people are listening to this like a year down the road, they could still contact me. There's just a bunch of really exciting things. I That book is being turned into a workbook. So I'm taking that book, I'm putting it into bigger format, and it's going to be a coloring book, like so you can color in all the images, as well as a workbook that asks some questions and gives you space to write in them. And then, like I said, I think sometime next year, my that'll be my fourth book by that time, will come out, which is the When Happiness is Work book on healing depression and loving your depression.
That is exciting stuff. Everything you're doing feels like my dream job. So I'm really happy that we connected. And as I told you before, you look exactly like my grandfather in spirit. And it's just such a blessing to, it's like sitting with him and it's beautiful, but you're your own beautiful person. And I'm glad that we
Thank
met. Thank you for sharing your insights, your experience, for showing up to spread the message that death is not a thing. It's just a transition into another form, and it's not to be feared. So
you.
that's why we're here. Thank you,
And you
Peter.
got this. You can't get it wrong.
Yes. Thank you so much, Peter Bedard, for being here.
Merci.